The Arizona sun hung merciless in the cloudless sky, beating down on the red earth with the fury of 1,000 hammers. Heat waves danced across the barren landscape, distorting the distant mesas into shimmering mirages. In this unforgiving wilderness, where even the cacti seemed to wilt under the brutal August heat of 1884, a lone figure moved like a ghost through the rocky terrain. Etta Calder pressed her back against a sandstone outcropping, her breath coming in short, controlled gasps. The worn leather of her boots was cracked from months of hard travel, and her once fine riding skirt was now little more than tattered cloth, hemmed with dust and desperation. She pulled the brim of her weather-beaten hat lower, shading eyes that had seen too much in their 28 years. For 3 days now, she'd been moving northeast from Tucson, staying off the main trails, drinking from hidden springs known only to the Apache and outlaws like herself. The wanted poster bearing her likeness, though it hardly did justice to her sharp cheekbones and storm-gray eyes, promised $500 for the capture of the desert wanderer, wanted for robbery and murder in New Mexico territory. Murder. The word still tasted like ash in her mouth. She hadn't killed Thomas Brennan. Her former lover had been very much alive when he'd testified against her, spinning lies as smoothly as silk thread. But the jury had believed him, not the woman who'd trusted him with her heart and her father's ranch deed. A sound carried on the wind horses, moving fast. Etta's hand instinctively went to the Colt .45 at her hip, a weapon she'd learned to use with deadly accuracy during her year on the run. She peered around the rock formation, squinting against the glare. What she saw made her blood run cold, then hot with recognition. 4 riders were bearing down on a lone horseman about a quarter-mile distant. Even from here, she could see the sun glinting off the silver star pinned to the lone rider's vest. A federal marshal, by the look of him, and he was about to be on the wrong end of an ambush. Etta should have slipped away, should have used the distraction to put more distance between herself and whoever might be tracking her. Federal marshals were the enemy men who'd hang her without a second thought if they knew who she was. But something in the way the marshal sat his horse, straight-backed despite being outnumbered, stirred a memory of her father. Colonel James Calder had been a man of principle, a former cavalry officer who'd taught her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. The first shot cracked across the desert like thunder. The marshal's horse screamed and went down, throwing its rider hard against the packed earth. To his credit, the lawman rolled and came up shooting, his Winchester speaking with authority. One of the ambushers toppled from his saddle, but 3 against 1 were poor odds in any man's book. Etta watched the marshal dive behind his fallen horse as bullets kicked up dust around him. She saw him reload with practiced efficiency, saw the determined set of his jaw beneath a week's worth of stubble. He was going to die out here, another casualty of the lawless frontier, and for some reason she couldn't fathom. That thought bothered her more than it should have. "Damn fool," she muttered, even as she drew her rifle from the scabbard on her back. Her first shot took the second ambusher clean off his horse. The man hit the ground and didn't move again. The remaining 2 attackers wheeled their mounts, confused by this unexpected threat from their flank. The marshal didn't waste the opportunity. His rifle barked twice more, and another rider slumped forward in his saddle before sliding to the earth. The last ambusher, apparently deciding the odds had shifted too far against him, spurred his horse and fled toward the southern mountains. Etta remained hidden, watching as the marshal slowly got to his feet. He moved stiffly, favoring his left side, and she could see the dark stain spreading across his blue shirt. He'd been hit. The lawman looked in her direction, shading his eyes with one hand while the other kept his rifle ready. "I know you're out there," he called, his voice carrying despite the obvious pain he was in. "Reckon I owe you my thanks." Etta could have melted back into the rocks, disappeared like smoke. Instead, she found herself stepping into view, her own rifle held loosely but ready. The marshal didn't raise his weapon, though she saw his eyes sharp and green as bottle glass take in every detail of her appearance. "You're hurt," she said, the words coming out more accusation than observation. "Noticed that myself. he replied with a pained half-smile that transformed his weathered features. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 35, with premature silver threading through his dark hair. Gideon Rourke, Deputy U.S., Marshal out of Fort Smith. He swayed on his feet, and Etta moved without thinking, catching his arm as his knees buckled. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her. When was the last time she'd touched another person with anything approaching gentleness? "Easy there, Marshal Rourke," she said, easing him to the ground. The wound was bad. A rifle bullet had punched through his side, and he was losing blood fast. "Just Gideon," he murmured, his eyes already going glassy. "Never did catch your name, Miss—" Etta hesitated, even half-conscious. A federal marshal was dangerous to her, but the man had fought with honor against poor odds, and something in his eyes, pain-filled but kind, made her want to tell the truth for the first time in months. Instead, she said, Rose McKenna. It was her mother's name, dead these 15 years. "Pretty name," Gideon mumbled. Then his eyes rolled back and he went limp in her arms. Etta knelt there in the dust, holding an unconscious lawman who might very well be carrying papers for her arrest, and made a decision that went against every survival instinct she'd honed over the past year. Her horse was hobbled a half-mile back in a box canyon. She couldn't carry Gideon that far, but she could drag him. First, though, she needed to stop the bleeding. Working quickly, she cut strips from her already ruined petticoat and packed the wound as best she could. The Marshal Gideon. She corrected herself, groaned, but didn't wake. It took her the better part of 2 hours to get him to her temporary camp. By then, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. The small cave she'd found was really more of a deep overhang, but it offered shelter from the elements and, more importantly, concealment from searching eyes. She'd built a small fire by the time Gideon stirred, his eyes flickering open to stare at the cave ceiling in confusion. "Lie still," Etta commanded, pressing a tin cup of water to his lips. "You've lost a lot of blood." He drank gratefully, then fixed those green eyes on her face. "Rose McKenna," he said slowly, as if tasting the name. "Why does a woman traveling alone in Apache country carry a rifle like she was born to it? Why does a federal marshal ride alone into ambush territory?" she countered. Fair point. He tried to sit up, grimaced, and thought better of it. "Though, in my defense, I wasn't expecting to find Sam Coulter's boys this far north. They usually stick to robbing stages near the Mexican border." Coulter's men. Etta kept her voice carefully neutral, though she knew the name. Sam Coulter ran guns to whoever paid best, and he'd approached her once about joining his gang. She'd declined, preferring to remain alone. "The very same. Been tracking them for 2 weeks. Gideon studied her with those 2 perceptive eyes. "You knew exactly where to place those shots. Military training." "My father," she said, which was true enough. He believed a woman should know how to protect herself. "Smart man." Gideon closed his eyes, and for a moment she thought he'd drifted off again. Then he said, "I've a packet of dispatches in my saddlebags. If I don't make it—" "You'll make it," Etta interrupted, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. He opened his eyes again, a slight smile playing at his lips. "That's so you a doctor as well as a marksman, Miss McKenna." "I've dug my share of bullets out of men," she said, which was also true. "You didn't survive on the outlaw trail without learning field medicine, though most of them had it coming." "And me, do I have it coming?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with more meaning than he could possibly know. Etta looked at this man who wore a badge, who represented everything that sought to cage or kill her, and found herself saying, No, I don't believe you do." As darkness fell over the desert and coyotes began their nightly chorus, Etta Calder, the desert wanderer with a price on her head, tended to the very man who might have been sent to bring her in. She cleaned his wound with the last of her whiskey, stitched torn flesh with thread pulled from her own clothing, and tried not to think about how his presence here could spell her doom. But when Gideon's fever broke near dawn, and he looked at her with eyes clear and grateful, she found herself thinking instead about how long it had been since anyone had looked at her without fear or greed. How long since she'd felt like Rose McKenna might have felt before betrayal and accusation had transformed her into someone else entirely. Outside their small shelter, the desert began to lighten with approaching day, and somewhere in that vast emptiness, danger continued to stalk them both. But for now, in this moment, they were simply two souls finding unexpected shelter in each other's company. While the relentless Arizona sun prepared to rise once more, the fever came and went like desert storms over the next 3 days. Gideon drifted between consciousness and delirium, sometimes calling out names that meant nothing to Etta Sarah, mostly spoken with such aching tenderness that it made her chest tight. Other times he was back in some long-ago gunfight, his hands twitching for weapons that weren't there. Etta remained by his side through it all, cooling his burning skin with precious water from her dwindling supply, forcing willow bark tea between his lips when he could swallow. She'd moved their camp twice, always staying ahead of anyone who might be tracking either of them. But traveling with a wounded man was slow, dangerous work. On the 4th morning, she woke to find green eyes watching her with full clarity for the first time. "How long?" Gideon's voice was hoarse but steady. 4 days. She handed him a cup of water, noting how his hands shook only slightly as he drank. The fever broke yesterday evening. He took in their surroundings, a different cave, this one deeper, with ancient pottery shards scattered in the corners. "You moved us." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "Coulter's men might come looking for their dead, and—" She hesitated. "Federal marshals don't usually ride alone. Figured your people might be searching too." "No people coming," he said quietly. "I was operating outside jurisdiction, following a personal lead. Nobody knows I'm out here." Something in his tone made her study him more closely. Pain lined his face, but not just from the wound. This was older, deeper. "Sarah." The name slipped out before she could stop it. His jaw tightened. "You were listening. You talked. Fever does that to a man." She busied herself checking his bandages, needing something to do with her hands. "Your wife." Was. The single word carried the weight of mountains. 3 years ago, Sam Coulter's gang robbed the stage she was traveling on. She tried to keep them from taking her mother's wedding ring. He didn't need to finish. Etta's hands stilled on the bandage. Now she understood why a federal marshal was operating alone, beyond his jurisdiction. This wasn't about justice. It was about vengeance. She knew that road well. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "Why did you save me?" The question came sudden and sharp. "You could have let them kill me, taken my horse and supplies. Nobody would have known." She sat back on her heels, considering how to answer. The truth was dangerous, but lies were exhausting, and she was so very tired. "My father used to say that we define ourselves by the choices we make when no one's watching," she said finally. "I've made plenty of poor choices. Didn't feel like adding another to the tally." "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was." She stood abruptly, needing distance from those too perceptive eyes. "I'm going to check the snares. Rest." But when she returned an hour later with a scrawny rabbit, Gideon was sitting up, his service revolver disassembled on a flat rock as he cleaned it with practiced movements. "Should you be doing that?" she asked. "Weapon maintenance is like breathing," he replied without looking up. "You stop doing it. You stop living." Another bit of wisdom from your father. "That one's all mine," she said about skinning the rabbit, aware of his eyes on her. "Something on your mind, Marshal." "Gideon," he corrected. "And yes, that rifle of yours, it's a .73 Winchester. Custom work by the look of it. The kind of weapon a person invests in when they plan to keep it for life. Your boots are quality beneath the wear, and that Colt on your hip has ivory grips. You move like someone accustomed to better circumstances, and your speech patterns suggest education. Etta kept her hand steady on her knife, though her heart had begun to race. Your point. Rose McKenna isn't your real name. The blade stilled. She could feel the weight of the Colt at her hip, knew she could have it out and aim before he could reassemble his revolver. But when she looked up, his expression held only curiosity, not accusation. No, she admitted. It's not. Are you wanted? The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Etta set down the knife and met his gaze squarely. If I were, then I'd say that a woman traveling alone in this territory, skilled with weapons and frontier medicine, probably has her reasons. He began reassembling his revolver with the same calm efficiency. I'd also say that anyone who'd save a lawman's life when it would have been easier to let him die has more honor than most who've never seen the inside of a jail cell. That's a dangerous philosophy for a marshal. Maybe. He slid the cylinder back into place with a soft click. But I've learned that the law and justice aren't always the same thing. Sometimes good people end up on the wrong side of a wanted poster through no fault of their own. Etta turned back to preparing the rabbit, her throat tight. And bad people sometimes end up with clean hands and respectable names. That too. They ate in companionable silence as the sun climbed toward its zenith. Despite everything, the pain, the fever, the rough circumstances, Gideon ate with good appetite. Color was returning to his face, and his movements were growing stronger. Tell me about this personal lead you were following, Etta said eventually. Gideon set aside his plate, his expression darkening. Got word that Coulter was moving a big shipment of rifles up from Mexico, army surplus, the kind that could arm a small revolution. Planning to sell them to the highest bidder might be Apache renegades, might be Mormon settlers, might be mining companies looking to strong-arm their competition. And you thought you'd take on his whole gang alone. I thought I'd scout their position, maybe pick off a few outriders, make them nervous. A bitter smile twisted his lips. Didn't count on them being nervous already. Should have known they'd post sentries this far out. Nervous about what? That's the question, isn't it? He shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. Coulter's been running guns for 15 years without getting caught. Suddenly he's jumpy as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Something's got him spooked. Etta filed this information away. In her months of running, she'd learned that understanding the movements of other outlaws could mean the difference between freedom and capture. Could be another gang trying to muscle in on his territory. Or maybe the army's finally taking notice. Maybe. But Gideon didn't sound convinced. He was studying her again with those sharp green eyes. You know this territory well. Well enough. And the people in it? The ones operating outside the law? She tensed. Survival makes for strange knowledge. I'm not interrogating you, he said gently. Lord knows, you've earned my trust 10 times over. I'm just thinking, a man in my position could use a guide who knows the shadows of this country. Someone who understands how outlaws think, where they run, who they fear. You're asking me to help you hunt Sam Coulter. I'm asking if you might consider it, after I'm healed enough to ride, of course. He leaned back against the cave wall, exhaustion beginning to show on his face again. I can't pay much. A marshal's salary isn't exactly generous, but I could offer something else. What's that? A federal marshal's word that Rose McKenna, whoever she really is, won't be questioned about her past or her reasons for being in this territory. As far as I'm concerned, you're a frontier doctor making your way honestly in hard country. Etta stared at him, searching for the trap, the deception, but his eyes remained steady, sincere. Why would you do that? Because you could have robbed me and left me to die, but instead you've spent 4 days nursing me back to health at considerable risk to yourself. Because when those men had me pinned, you chose to act when you could have stayed hidden. Because, he paused, seeming to wrestle with the words, because I haven't felt like I could trust someone in 3 years, and that's worth more than any wanted poster. She turned away. overwhelmed by the offer and what it meant to have an ally. Someone who could vouch for her if questions arose. It was more than she'd dared hope for in months of running. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Fair enough. I'm not going anywhere fast." He closed his eyes, weariness overtaking him. "Wake me if trouble comes calling." As his breathing deepened into sleep, Etta sat at the cave mouth, watching the desert shimmer in the afternoon heat. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she found herself thinking beyond the next meal, the next hiding spot, the next close escape. Gideon Rourke was offering her something she'd thought lost forever, a chance to stop running, even if only temporarily. But helping him would mean riding toward danger instead of away from it, risking exposure if anyone recognized her. She thought about Thomas Brennan, about the trial where his lies had painted her as a murderer, about the ranch that had been in her family for 2 generations, stolen now by the man she'd loved, about the way Gideon had said her assumed name, Rose, like it was something precious. When he woke at sunset, she had rabbit stew waiting and a decision made. "I know where Coulter likes to hole up when he's moving merchandise north," she said without preamble. "There's a box canyon about 3 days' ride from here, good water, natural fortifications. If he's nervous about something, that's where he'll be." Gideon smiled, the expression transforming his weather-beaten features. "Partners, then." "For now," she agreed, trying not to think about how that smile made something in her chest loosen, like a fist slowly unclenching. "But we do this my way. You're in no shape for heroics, and I didn't save your life just to watch you throw it away on some fool crusade." "Yes, ma'am," he said with mock solemnity, but his eyes were warm. "Your way it is." As darkness settled over the desert and they shared their simple meal, Etta found herself stealing glances at this unusual lawman who offered trust instead of judgment, who carried his own burden of loss without letting it twist him into something cruel. She'd been alone so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone to talk to plan with, to worry over. It was dangerous, this feeling, more dangerous perhaps than any wanted poster or bounty hunter. But as Gideon told a story about his first days as a deputy, making her laugh despite herself, Etta decided that some dangers might be worth the risk. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, the journey ahead, the threat of Coulter's gang, the constant fear of discovery. But tonight, in this hidden cave with an unlikely ally, she allowed herself to simply be Rose McKenna, frontier doctor, sharing a meal with a man who looked at her and saw something worth saving. The days that followed took on a rhythm as steady as heartbeat. Each morning, Etta would check Gideon's wound, pleased to see it healing cleanly despite the harsh conditions. He submitted to her ministrations with a patience that surprised her. Most men she'd known chafed at being dependent, but Gideon seemed to accept his limitations with quiet grace. "You're a natural healer," he told her one morning as she rewrapped his bandages. "Ever think of settling somewhere, maybe opening a proper practice?" She laughed, but it came out bitter. "Towns require respectability, martial references, a past that bears examining." "Just Gideon," he reminded her gently. "And plenty of frontier towns ask fewer questions than you might think. Skills matter more than history out here." Speaking from experience. He was quiet for a moment. "My deputy in Fort Smith, Chen Wei, came over from China during the railroad days. No papers, no English at first. Now he's the best tracker I've ever worked with, and Judge Parker himself requested him special for the court. Sometimes people just need a chance." Etta concentrated on tying off the bandage, not trusting herself to speak. The idea of belonging somewhere, of being judged by her actions rather than accusations, it was a dream she'd abandoned months ago. By the 7th day, Gideon was able to walk short distances without support. They'd moved camp again, working their way slowly north toward the canyon where Coulter might be hiding. Etta had shot a deer, and they'd spent the day smoking the meat, preparing for the journey ahead. "Tell me about your father," Gideon said that evening as they sat by their small fire. The desert night was cool. Stars scattered like spilled silver across the black sky. Why? The question came out sharper than she intended. Because you quote him like scripture. Because you handle weapons like someone trained from childhood. Because when you think I'm not looking, you get this expression like you're carrying the weight of disappointing someone who mattered. Etta poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks rise into the darkness. Colonel James Calder, veteran of the Mexican War. Later the conflict between the states. He came west after my mother died. Said the frontier was the only place left where a man's word still meant something. Calder, Gideon repeated thoughtfully. There was a Colonel Calder commanded Fort Buchanan down in Arizona Territory, back in the 60s. The same? She kept her voice level, though her heart had begun to race. How much did he know? How much had he already figured out? Good man, by all accounts. Fair with the Apache, tough on bandits. Whatever happened to him? He died. The words came out flat. Final. 5 years ago. Heart gave out while he was breaking a horse, at least that's what they said. I always wondered if it wasn't broken by other things first. Gideon was quiet, letting the silence stretch comfortable between them. Then, my grandfather was a preacher, Presbyterian. Used to say that we're all walking wounded. Some of us just hide it better. The trick is finding someone you don't have to hide from. Your grandfather sounds like he was full of sayings. He was full of something, that's certain. The dry humor in his voice made her smile despite herself. But he wasn't wrong about the wounded part. We all carry our ghosts. Even marshals. Especially marshals. We see too much of what people do to each other. Makes it hard to trust. Harder still to hope. He shifted, leaning back against a rock. Sarah used to say I was getting cynical. Said I needed to remember that for every outlaw. There were 10 good people just trying to live their lives. Was she right? I thought so then. After she died. He trailed off, staring into the fire. Let's just say I lost sight of those good people for a while. Started seeing everyone as either predator or prey. And now, he looked at her then, firelight dancing in his green eyes. Now I'm sitting with a woman who could have been long gone with my horse and supplies, but who's instead spent a week nursing a stranger back to health. Maybe Sarah was right after all. Etta felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. She stood abruptly. I should check the perimeter. Rose. Her assumed name stopped her mid-step. Whatever you're running from, whoever you were before I meant what I said, your secrets are safe with me. She didn't turn around. Couldn't risk him seeing her face just then. A dangerous promise for a lawman to make. Maybe, but I've found that the most dangerous things in life are often the most worthwhile. She fled into the darkness then, needing space to breathe, to think. She'd grown too comfortable with him, let her guard down too far. The way he looked at her, like she was someone worth knowing it was everything she'd thought she'd never have again. An hour later, when she returned to camp, she found him attempting to practice his draw with his injured side. His face was pale with effort, sweat beading on his forehead. You're going to tear those stitches, she scolded, rushing to steady him as he swayed. Need to be ready, he gasped out. Can't face Coulter's gang shooting like a greenhorn. You can't face Coulter's gang if you bleed to death from stupidity either. She helped him sit, noting how he leaned into her support. What brought this on? He was quiet for a moment, catching his breath. Bad dream. Except it wasn't a dream, just memory. Sarah's last moments. The fear in her eyes. The way she said my name at the end, like I could fix it. Like I could save her if I just tried hard enough. Gideon. I was 3 hours away when it happened. 3 hours. If I'd left earlier. If I'd insisted she wait another day. If I'd... Stop! She gripped his shoulders, forcing him to look at her. That road leads nowhere good. Trust me. You can't change what's done. You can only decide what to do next. Speaking from experience again. More than you know. She released him, sitting back. The man who betrayed me, Thomas. I've replayed every conversation, every moment, looking for the signs I missed, wondering if I could have done something different, been someone different. But all that does is poison the present with the past. How do you let it go? I haven't, she admitted. But I've learned to carry it without letting it carry me away. Some days are harder than others. They sat in silence for a while, the fire burning low. Finally, Gideon spoke again. Will you tell me about what happened? Etta considered the question. She'd held the truth so close for so long. It had become part of her, like scar tissue over a wound. But sitting here in the firelight with this man who offered understanding instead of judgment, she found the words rising like floodwater against a dam. Thomas Brennan came to work for my father 3 years ago. Charming, educated, said he'd studied law back east. Father was getting older, needed help managing the ranch's legal matters. She paused, searching for the right words. I was lonely, I suppose, 25 years old. Most women my age already married with children, but I'd been too busy helping Father, too particular about men who couldn't see past a woman in trousers who could outride and outshoot them. But Thomas was different. He seemed to didn't mind that I ran the ranch as much as Father did, said he admired my strength, my independence. Fool that I was. I believed him. The bitterness was back in her voice. We were engaged within 6 months. Father died that winter, his heart. Like I said, Thomas helped me through the grief, handled all the legal matters. I signed papers without reading them, trusted him completely. Gideon said nothing, but his attention was complete, understanding already dawning in his eyes. The ranch was profitable, good water rights, strong cattle, contracts with the army, worth killing for, though I didn't see it that way then. She picked up a small stone, turning it over in her fingers. 6 months after Father died, I came home early from town to find Thomas in the study with 2 men I didn't recognize. They had maps spread out, plans for dividing the ranch. Thomas was explaining how much easier it would be once his wife was out of the picture. Christ, Gideon breathed. I confronted them. Should have been smarter. Should have gone for help. But I was so angry, so hurt. There was a fight. One of the men, Davidson was his name, pulled a gun. Thomas tried to stop him, not from any concern for me, but because he needed me alive to finish transferring the property. In the struggle, Davidson was shot with his own gun. Self-defense. That's not how Thomas told it. Her voice was flat now, emotionless. He was a lawyer. Remember, knew exactly what to say, how to say it. Painted me as a jealous woman who'd killed his business associate in a rage. Had forged documents suggesting I'd been unstable since Father's death. The jury believed every word. How did you escape? The marshal transporting me to prison was a decent man. Stopped to let me tend to personal needs in private. I ran. She gave a bitter laugh. Been running ever since. The desert wanderer. They call me now $500, dead or alive. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on her knee. The touch was gentle, careful, but it sent warmth flooding through her. I'm sorry, he said simply. For what it's worth, I believe you. Why? The word came out choked. You don't know me, not really. I know enough. His thumb moved in a small circle against her hand. I know you could have killed me that first day and taken everything I had. I know you've spent a week caring for a stranger who represents everything that threatens you. I know you speak of your father with love and respect, and that you carry yourself like someone who's lived with honor even when the world stopped being honorable to you. She turned her hand palm up, lacing her fingers through his. It was such a simple thing, holding someone's hand, but it felt like coming home after a long, cold journey. This is dangerous, she whispered. Getting close to me, trusting me. I'm poison to anyone who... No. His grip tightened. You're not poison. You're a woman who was betrayed by someone she loved, who lost everything and survived it. That takes a kind of strength most people never need to find. I'm still wanted, still running. Then we'll deal with that when we need to. For now, you're Rose McKenna, frontier doctor and the woman who saved my life. That's all that matters." She looked at him then, this unusual lawman who offered acceptance instead of accusation, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not her heart that had been too badly broken to mend so quickly, but maybe, just maybe, the beginning of believing it could be mended at all. "We should get some sleep," she said finally, not pulling her hand away. "Tomorrow we start toward Coulter's Canyon." In a moment, he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I just want to say whatever happens with Coulter, whether we find him or not, I'm glad you were the one who found me that day. Even knowing what you know now." "Especially knowing." He squeezed her hand once more before releasing it. "Now, let's get some rest. Something tells me we're going to need it." As they settled into their bedrolls on opposite sides of the dying fire, Etta found herself thinking about trust and truth, about the weight of secrets and the unexpected lightness that came from sharing them. For the first time in over a year, she wasn't alone with her burden. It terrified her. It gave her hope. And somewhere in the vast Arizona darkness, that felt like the most dangerous thing of all. The clouds had been building all day, dark and heavy against the northern mountains. By late afternoon, the air itself felt alive, charged with the electricity of approaching storm. Etta had been watching the sky with growing unease. Flash floods in canyon country could turn a safe shelter into a death trap in minutes. "We need to move," she said, already packing their supplies. "That wash we've been following is going to be a river within the hour." Gideon didn't question her judgment. 10 days of traveling together had taught him to trust her instincts about the desert. He moved stiffly but efficiently, helping her secure their gear. The first fat drops of rain were falling as they climbed higher into the rocky terrain. Thunder rolled across the landscape like artillery fire, and lightning illuminated the mesa in stark, silver flashes. Within minutes, the drops had become a deluge. There, Etta pointed through the rain to a dark shadow in the cliff face. It looked like another cave, hopefully above the flood line. They stumbled toward it, the ground already turning to treacherous mud beneath their feet. Gideon slipped, his bad side making him clumsy, and Etta caught his arm, pulling him upright. Together they fought their way to the cave mouth just as the wash below them began to roar with churning brown water. The cave was really more of an old line shack built into a natural overhang, abandoned now, but once used by shepherds or prospectors. The wooden door hung by one hinge, and the single room smelled of pack rats and decay. But it was dry. Home, sweet home, Gideon muttered, water streaming from his hat. They were both soaked through, shivering in the sudden cold that came with the storm. Etta found some old wooden crates and a broken chair, probably left by the shack's last occupants. It would be enough for a fire. "We need to get out of these wet clothes," she said, trying to sound matter-of-fact even as heat crept up her neck. "Pneumonia's killed more folks out here than bullets." "Practical as always," Gideon said, but she could hear the strain in his voice. The hard travel had taken its toll on his still-healing body. They turned their backs to each other, stripping down to undergarments with the awkward efficiency of people trying not to think too hard about the situation. Etta strung a rope across the small space and hung their clothes to dry, the fire beginning to warm the cramped quarters. She'd kept one mostly dry blanket protected in oilcloth. Without looking at him directly, she held it out. "Here, you're shaking." "So are you." It was true. The adrenaline of their flight was wearing off, leaving her trembling with cold and something else, an awareness of him that had been building for days. The small space seemed to shrink further as he stepped closer, taking one end of the blanket. "We'll share," he said quietly. "Body heat, it's only practical." Practical, yes. That's all this was, two people trying to survive a storm. But as they sat close together on the dusty floor, the blanket wrapped around both their shoulders. Etta was achingly aware of every point of contact between them. His shoulder against hers, the heat of his body slowly seeping through the thin fabric of her chemise. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury. Lightning struck close by, the thunder immediate and deafening. Etta couldn't suppress a flinch. "Not fond of storms?" Gideon asked. "Not fond of being trapped," she corrected. "Too many ways for things to go wrong when you can't run." His arm came around her shoulders, gentle but secure. "You don't always have to run." Rose. The use of her assumed name, which he knew was false, made something twist in her chest. "It's Etta," she said suddenly. "My real name, Etta Calder." She felt him go still beside her. "Etta," he repeated, as if tasting the name. "It suits you better than Rose. Does it change things knowing for certain who I am?" "The only thing it changes is that I can stop pretending I don't know exactly who you are." His hand found her chin, gently turning her face toward him. "I've known for days. Etta, Colonel Calder's daughter. The woman who supposedly murdered Davidson in cold blood. $500 bounty." Her heart was hammering against her ribs. And I've never been more certain that a wanted poster was wrong." His thumb traced the line of her jaw, leaving fire in its wake. "You're no more a murderer than I am. Less, probably, given some of the things I've done wearing this badge." "Gideon, I know what you're going to say. That this is dangerous. That getting close to you is a mistake. But Etta, I've been dead inside for 3 years. Just going through the motions, telling myself that vengeance would fix the hole Sarah left behind." His green eyes were intense in the firelight. "Then you found me, and for the first time since I lost her, I remember what it feels like to want to live instead of just survive." The storm chose that moment to unleash its full fury. Rain hammered against the old wooden door like it was trying to break through. Wind howled through gaps in the walls, making their small fire dance wildly. But inside their cocoon of shared warmth, Etta felt suspended in a moment outside of time. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words barely audible above the storm. "Of what?" "Of hoping, of believing this could be real. Of waking up tomorrow and finding out you've changed your mind about who I am. What I've done. Look at me." When she did, his expression was fierce with certainty. "I've changed my mind about a lot of things since meeting you. About justice and law, about second chances and who deserves them. But I haven't changed my mind about you. If anything, every day I'm more certain that finding you was the first right thing to happen to me in years." Lightning illuminated the shack in brilliant white, and in that instant of clarity, Etta saw her future branching into 2 paths. One led back to the solitary safety of running, of never trusting, never stopping long enough to be caught. The other led to this man who looked at her like she was worth saving, worth knowing, worth the risk. She kissed him. It wasn't gentle. 3 years of loneliness, of fear, of forcing herself not to feel it all poured out in that kiss. He made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, his hands tangling in her still damp hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Etta." "Don't," she whispered. "Don't tell me this is a mistake. Don't be noble. Just let us have this tonight, while the storm keeps the rest of the world away." His answer was to kiss her again. Slower this time, with a tenderness that made her eyes burn with unshed tears. When was the last time someone had touched her with care instead of violence? When had she last felt wanted instead of hunted? They made a bed of their single blanket near the fire, the storm providing all the privacy 2 wounded souls needed. What followed was a conversation without words, gentle hands learning scars and stories, soft gasps and whispered names. 2 people finding their way back to something human and whole in each other's arms. Afterwards, they lay entwined, watching the fire burn low while the storm began to exhaust itself outside. Gideon traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. And Etta felt a contentment she'd thought lost forever. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked eventually. "Tomorrow we continue to Coulter's Canyon. We finish what I started. And after..." He was quiet for a long moment. "After we disappear. There's a lot of frontier out there. A lot of places where Marshal Gideon Rourke and Etta Calder could stop existing, where a man and woman with different names could start fresh. You'd give up your badge, your life." "What life?" He pulled her closer. "Going through the motions in Fort Smith, hunting men for bounties, trying to fill Sarah's absence with whiskey and work. That's not living. Etta, this what we have here, this is living." "It won't be easy. I'll always be looking over my shoulder. Then I'll watch your back, and you'll watch mine." He kissed her temple. "Partners. Remember?" She turned in his arms, needing to see his face. "You really mean it? You'd throw everything away for a woman you've known less than 2 weeks?" "I'd throw everything away for the woman who saved my life, who trusted me with her truth, who makes me remember why I became a lawman in the first place, to protect people who deserve protecting." His hand cupped her face. "I'd face 100 bullets to wake up with you. Etta Calder. Question is, will you let me..." The words hung between them, heavy with promise and possibility. Outside, the rain had gentled to a steady patter, the thunder rolling away toward distant mountains. The worst of the storm had passed, but here in this ramshackle shelter, something new had been born from its fury. "Yes," she whispered, and sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted of rain and hope and tomorrow. They made love again as the storm finally broke, slower and sweeter this time, memorizing each other against whatever dawn might bring, and when sleep finally claimed them, it was wrapped in each other's arms. No longer 2 people running from the past, but 2 souls running toward a future neither had dared imagine. The morning would bring its own challenges: Coulter's Canyon, the danger of the hunt, the constant threat of discovery. But for now, in this stolen moment between storm and sunrise, they were simply Etta and Gideon, 2 hearts finding shelter in the wilderness of each other. And that, Etta thought as she drifted off to sleep, her head on Gideon's chest, listening to his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear that was worth any risk the tomorrow might bring. The morning after the storm dawned crystal clear, the desert washed clean and sparkling, but the clarity of day brought with it a cold reality that pierced through the warmth of the previous night. Etta woke to find Gideon already dressed, standing at the shack's broken door with his hand on his revolver, every line of his body tense. "What is it?" she asked, reaching for her own weapon. "Horses, 3, maybe 4, moving along the wash below." His voice was carefully neutral, the lawman's mask sliding back into place. She dressed quickly, efficiently, trying not to think about how different everything felt in daylight, how the intimacy they'd shared now seemed like a dream, dissolving in the harsh morning sun. By the time she joined him at the door, the riders were visible, rough-looking men, the kind who made their living in the shadows of the law. "Coulter's men," she whispered. "Possibly. Or bounty hunters. Or just drifters." He glanced at her, and she saw the struggle in his eyes. "We need to move. Now." They slipped out the back of the shack, keeping to the rocks, moving with the practiced silence of people who knew their lives depended on it. But something had shifted between them. Where before there had been easy partnership, now there was a careful distance, as if the night's revelations had built a wall of glass between them, transparent but undeniably present. They traveled in near silence for hours, putting distance between themselves and the potential threat. When they finally stopped to rest in the shade of a massive boulder, Etta couldn't stand it anymore. "Say it," she demanded. Gideon looked up from checking his rifle. "Say what?" "Whatever's been eating at you since dawn. The regret, the second thoughts, the realization that last night was a mistake." "Stop!" The word came out sharp. He set down the rifle and rubbed his face with both hands. "It's not that... God, Etta, it's not that at all." "Then what?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, pained. I know who you are. Have known for days. Like I said, but knowing and understanding are different things. Her stomach turned to lead. What do you mean? In the shack, going through my saddlebags while you slept, I found something I'd forgotten about. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, even from a distance. She recognized it, her wanted poster. Deputy Collins gave it to me 3 weeks ago, before I left Fort Smith. Said there'd been inquiries about her, that someone was putting together a hunting party. And you just remembered this now? The bitterness in her voice could have stripped paint. No, I remembered it days ago, but I told myself it didn't matter, that the woman on this poster and the woman who saved my life couldn't be the same person. Even knowing your name, I could keep them separate in my mind. He met her eyes then, and the pain there made her chest tight. But last night you became real to me in a way that makes the separation impossible. So, what are you saying? That you're going to bring me in after all? That one night together was your way of... She didn't see him move. One moment he was sitting across from her. The next, he had her face in his hands, his lips on hers with desperate intensity. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. I'm saying that I'm terrified, he said roughly. Not of you, but for you. Because now I can't lose you. Etta, I can't. And every bounty hunter in the territory is looking for you. Every marshal, every sheriff, every two-bit gunslinger who thinks $500 will change his life. That's not your burden to... The hell it's not. He released her, began pacing like a caged animal. Last night I promised to watch your back, to build a future together. But what kind of future can I offer when I know there are men already hunting you and Thomas Brennan has probably hired professionals to ensure you never come back to challenge his claim? The name hit her like cold water. How do you know about that? I'm a marshal. Etta. I know how to ask questions, how to piece together stories. Your ranch, the Calder Spread, is worth 10 times that bounty. Brennan's not just protecting himself from prosecution, he's protecting an empire built on lies. She sank down onto a rock, suddenly exhausted. So you understand why I can't stop running? Why last night was a beautiful dream, but just a dream? No. He knelt in front of her, taking her hands. I understand why we need to stop running and start fighting. Etta, what if we could prove your innocence, clear your name? Hal Brennan has all the documents, all the witnesses, his word against mine, and I'm already convicted. But you're not dead, and as long as you're alive, you're a threat to him. He'll make mistakes, get desperate. Men like that always do. His grip on her hands tightened. After we deal with Coulter, we could... After Coulter... She pulled her hands free, standing abruptly. Gideon, you're talking about taking on one of the most dangerous gangs in the territory while wounded, with a wanted woman as your only backup. And then somehow taking on a corrupt landowner with legal documents and paid witnesses. Do you hear yourself? I hear myself fine. I also heard myself last night when I said I'd face 100 bullets to wake up with you. He stood as well, facing her with that stubborn set to his jaw she'd come to recognize. I meant it then. I mean it now. Words spoken in passion. Words spoken in truth. The first truth I've told myself in 3 years. He moved closer, not touching, but near enough that she could feel his warmth. I've been dead inside since Sarah died, going through the motions, telling myself that justice and vengeance were the same thing. Then you found me, and suddenly I remembered why justice matters not for the dead, but for the living, for people like you who deserve better than running forever. Gideon. I'm not finished. His voice was fierce now, impassioned. You saved my life, Etta. Not just from those bullets, but from the walking death I'd made of my existence. You think that's something I can just set aside, come morning? You think what we shared last night was just bodies seeking comfort in a storm? Wasn't it? She hated how small her voice sounded, how much she wanted him to convince her otherwise. You know it wasn't. He did touch her then, his hand gentle on her cheek. It was two people finding something worth fighting for, worth living for, worth facing impossible odds for. She leaned into his touch despite herself. And when those impossible odds get us both killed, then at least we'll have lived first. Really lived, not just survived. His thumb traced her cheekbone. That's more than either of us could say a week ago. She wanted to argue further, to point out all the ways his hope would lead to disaster. But standing there in the morning light, seeing the determination in his eyes mixed with something softer, something that looked dangerously like love, she found her resistance crumbling. "You really mean to do this?" she said. "Take on Coulter, then somehow take on Brennan and the law itself." "I mean to try, but not alone." He stepped back, giving her space. "I'm asking you to trust me, Etta, to believe that together we might accomplish what neither of us could alone, to take a chance on something more than just staying one step ahead of the past. And if I say no, if I leave now, keep running like I have been..." Pain flickered across his face, but his voice remained steady. "Then I'll let you go, give you what supplies you need, point you toward the safest routes I know. I won't force you to stay, won't try to be another man making choices for you. But I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it, wondering where you are, if you're safe, if you ever found peace." He picked up his rifle, checked it with mechanical precision. "And I'll probably get myself killed taking on Coulter alone, because I won't have my partner watching my back." The manipulation was so blatant it should have angered her. Instead, she found herself fighting a smile. "That's not fair." "Never said I'd fight fair. Man in love rarely does." The words hung in the air between them, unexpected and undeniable. Love. Neither of them had used that word last night, careful to keep some walls intact even as they tore others down. But here in the harsh light of day, with all the reasons they should part ways laid bare, he'd said it like it was the simplest truth in the world. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough. Know you're brave and strong and loyal. Know you've survived betrayal and loss without letting it turn you cruel. Know you make me want to be a better man than I've been." He shouldered his rifle, meeting her eyes steadily. "If that's not love, I don't know what is." She stood there, caught between past and future, between safety and hope. Everything practical in her screamed to run, to take his offer of supplies and disappear into the vast frontier. But her heart, her foolish, awakening heart, wanted to believe in the impossible dream he was offering. "If we do this," she said slowly, "we do it smart. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. We scout Coulter's position, only engage if we have advantage. And after, if we survive, we take time to plan properly before going after Brennan." Hope dawned in his eyes like sunrise. "Is that a yes?" "That's a I must be out of my mind, but yes." She picked up her own rifle, checking it as he had. "Partners." "Partners." He held out his hand, and when she took it, he pulled her close for a kiss that was brief but full of promise. "We're going to make this work, Etta. I swear it." "Don't make promises you can't keep, Marshal." "Former Marshal," he corrected. "And I only make promises I intend to die trying to keep." As they set out again across the desert, Etta found the distance between them had dissolved. They moved as they had before, in easy synchronization. But now there was something more, a shared purpose beyond mere survival. It was dangerous, probably foolish, certainly unlikely to succeed. But for the first time in over a year, Etta Calder wasn't running from something. She was moving toward it, with a man beside her who looked at her and saw not a wanted woman but a future worth fighting for. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to build a dream on. They reached Coulter's Canyon at dusk on the third day. From their position high on the rim rock, they could see the outlaw camp spread below a collection of tents and lean-tos arranged around a central fire. Horses picketed nearby, men moving about with the casual confidence of those who believed themselves untouchable. 20 men, maybe 25, Gideon murmured, studying the scene through his field glasses. More than I expected. Too many, Etta said flatly. We should go. Report the location to the army. Let them handle it. But even as she spoke, she saw him tense. He'd spotted something that made his jaw clench tight. Following his gaze, she saw what had caught his attention, a woman tied to a post near the largest tent, her dress torn, her face bruised. Captive, Gideon said, his voice carefully controlled. Probably taken from a stage or ranch raid. Etta closed her eyes, already knowing how this would go. The man beside her wasn't capable of riding away from someone in trouble, any more than she'd been capable of letting him die in the desert. It was what she loved about him. It was what was going to get them killed. We can't take 20 men, she said, trying one more time. No, he agreed, but we might not have to. They spent the rest of the evening watching, learning the camp's rhythms. Guards changed every 4 hours. Most of the gang spent the nights drinking, only a few remaining alert. The woman was given water twice, but otherwise ignored, suggesting she was being saved for something. Perhaps ransom or worse. There. Gideon pointed to a narrow ravine cutting down from their position. Leads almost to their horse line. If we could scatter their mounts, create confusion. It's still suicide. Maybe? He turned to look at her in the fading light. I won't ask you to do this, Etta. This is my fight, my choice. You could... If you finish that sentence, I'll shoot you myself. She interrupted. Partners, remember your fool crusade is my fool crusade. He smiled then, that crooked grin that never failed to make her heart skip. Have I mentioned that I love you? Save it for when we survive this. They waited until the deepest part of the night, when the campfires had burned low and most of the outlaws were wrapped in their bedrolls. Etta made her way down the ravine while Gideon positioned himself with his rifle overlooking the camp. The plan was simple. She would cut the horses loose and fire her gun to scatter them. In the confusion, Gideon would pin down any outlaws who tried to respond while she freed the captive. Simple plans, Etta reflected as she bellied through the dust toward the picket line, had a way of going wrong. She'd cut half the horses free when a man emerged from behind a boulder, fumbling with his trousers. He saw her at the same moment she saw him, his eyes widening in shock. But Etta was already moving, her knife leaving her hand to bury itself in his throat before he could cry out. The body hit the ground with a soft thud, too soft to wake anyone. But one of the horses snorted nervously, and another outlaw stirred in his bedroll. No time for subtlety now. Etta drew her pistol and fired into the air, shouting at the top of her lungs. The horses, already nervous, exploded into motion, charging through the camp in a thunder of hooves. Chaos erupted. Men scrambled from their bedrolls, shouting, cursing, diving aside from the stampeding horses. Gideon's rifle cracked from above, and an outlaw spun and fell. Then another. Etta ran for the captive. Dodging between confused outlaws and panicked horses, a man loomed out of the darkness, raising a shotgun. She shot him twice, center mass, and kept running. The woman was young, maybe 19, with the kind of prettiness that would have made her a target. Her eyes were wide with terror as Etta skidded to a stop beside her. I'm here to help, Etta said, sawing at the ropes with her recovered knife. Can you run? The girl nodded frantically. The ropes parted, and Etta hauled her to her feet. Stay close and keep low. They'd made it halfway to the ravine when Sam Coulter himself emerged from the large tent, pistol in hand, taking in the chaos with the cold calculation of a man used to violence. His eyes found Etta and the girl, and his gun swung toward them. The shot came from above Gideon's rifle, speaking with deadly authority. Coulter staggered, clutching his shoulder, but didn't go down. More men were organizing now, returning fire toward Gideon's position. Go! Etta shoved the girl toward the ravine. Climb! Don't stop! She turned back, adding her fire to Gideon's, trying to keep the outlaws pinned down. But there were too many, and they were beginning to flank their position. A bullet whined past her ear. Another tugged at her sleeve. "Etta!" Gideon's voice carried over the gunfire. "Move!" She ran, scrambling up the ravine as bullets chipped rock around her. The girl was ahead, climbing with desperate strength. Behind them, the outlaws were organizing a pursuit. They reached the top to find Gideon already mounted, holding the reins of their horses. Blood ran down his left arm, but he was steady in the saddle. "You're hit," Etta said. "Later, ride." They thundered into the darkness, the girl clinging to Etta's waist, Gideon leading them through terrain that would be suicide to navigate at speed if he didn't know it so well. Behind them, shouts and scattered gunfire indicated pursuit, but disorganized, hampered by the loss of their horses. They rode hard for an hour before Gideon finally slowed, swaying in his saddle. Etta pulled alongside, saw his sleeve soaked with blood. "How bad?" "Through and through, missed the bone." But his face was pale in the moonlight, his words slightly slurred. They found shelter in a cluster of rocks, barely more than a windbreak, but enough to hide them. Etta worked by touch and moonlight, cleaning and binding Gideon's arm, while the girl who'd given her name as Mary Sullivan kept watch. "That was foolish," Etta said as she tied off the bandage. "Worked, didn't it? We got lucky. Coulter's still alive, and now he knows someone's hunting him. He'll be ready next time. Maybe. Or maybe he'll be running scared, making mistakes." He caught her hand. "We saved her. Etta, that matters." She wanted to argue, to point out that they'd risked everything for a stranger. But looking at Mary Sullivan so young, so grateful to be free, she couldn't find the words. This was who they were. Apparently, people who did foolish things for the right reasons. "You're both crazy," Mary said softly. "Wonderful, but crazy." "That about sums us up," Gideon agreed with a pained smile. They rested until dawn, then moved again, putting distance between themselves and any pursuit. Mary told her story as they rode taken from a stage between Tucson and Tombstone, held for ransom that her merchant father couldn't pay. She'd been with Coulter's gang for a week, expecting death or worse at any moment. "Where will you go now?" Etta asked. "Back to Tombstone, I suppose. My family must be worried sick." Mary studied them with curious eyes. "What about you? That was no official raid. You're not regular law." Etta and Gideon exchanged glances. How much to tell, how much to trust. "We're complicated," Gideon said finally. Mary surprised them by laughing. "A lawman and an outlaw working together. I read a dime novel like that once. Thought it was ridiculous, but here you are." "How did you—" "The way you move, martial, the way you study everything like you're writing a report in your head. And you," she looked at Etta, "you handle those guns like someone who's lived outside polite society." "Also, I heard what Coulter's men were saying. They recognized you, the desert wanderer. They called you, said there was good money for bringing you in." Etta's hand moved to her pistol, but Mary held up her hands. "Peace, I owe you my life. Your secrets are safe with me." She smiled. "Besides, after what I've seen, I think the law could use more outlaws on its side." They parted ways at a crossroads 2 days later. Mary had relatives in Benson who could see her safely home. Before she left, she pressed a small leather pouch into Etta's hands. "My grandmother's rings," she explained. "Worth enough to start fresh somewhere. If you wanted, call it a thank you, or a wedding gift, if that's where you're headed." Etta tried to refuse, but Mary was insistent. "You risked everything for a stranger. Let me give you something in return." As they watched her ride away, Gideon slipped his good arm around Etta's waist. "She's right, you know, about where we're headed. To face down Thomas Brennan and probably die trying. Eventually, but I was thinking nearer term. There's a mission church about 50 miles north. Father Miguel asks no questions and keeps no records." He turned her to face him. "Marry me," Etta called her. Before we take on the rest of the world, let me at least have the right to call you my wife. Gideon. I know it won't be legal in the eyes of most, a wanted woman and a former marshal who's probably wanted himself by now for dereliction of duty. But it would be real to us. That's all that matters. She studied his face, weathered, wounded, but filled with such hope it took her breath away. 3 weeks ago she'd been alone, trusting no one, expecting nothing but survival. Now this man was offering her a future she'd never dared imagine. You're proposing to me at a dusty crossroads, covered in blood and trail dirt, after nearly getting killed rescuing a stranger. Would you prefer I wait until we're being shot at again? Seems to be our natural state. Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, she laughed. Yes. Yes, you want me to wait, or yes. Yes, I'll marry you, you fool. She kissed him, careful of his wounded arm. Though God knows why. Because you love me, he said with that crooked grin. And because you know I'm right, we're stronger together than apart. Also because you're too stubborn to take no for an answer. That too. They mounted up and turned north, toward the mission and whatever came after. Behind them, the dust of their passage settled, erasing their tracks. Ahead, the future waited uncertain, dangerous, but no longer empty of hope. Etta Calder, the desert wanderer, was done running. It was time to start fighting for the life she wanted, with the man who'd shown her it was possible. And if that wasn't love worth risking everything for, she didn't know what was. The mission church of San Xavier stood like a white dove against the desert sky, its bell tower reaching toward heaven with quiet dignity. They'd arrived at sunset, when the adobe walls glowed golden and the small community of faithful were gathering for evening prayers. Father Miguel was everything Gideon had promised, a small, weathered man with kind eyes and hands that had blessed more unions than the law might approve of. He asked no questions about their names or circumstances, simply nodding when Gideon requested a quiet ceremony. Tomorrow morning, the priest said in accented English, before the heat of day, God's blessings come with the dawn. They spent the night in the mission's guest quarters, separate rooms as propriety demanded. Etta lay awake, staring at the rough-hewn ceiling beams, trying to reconcile the woman she'd been with the one she was becoming. Tomorrow she would stand before God and promise herself to a man she'd known less than a month. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a strange peace, as if all the running had led her here, to this moment of choosing. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Maria, Father Miguel's housekeeper, holding a bundle of white fabric. For tomorrow, the older woman said, pressing the dress into Etta's hands. Every bride should have something beautiful. The dress was simple but lovely, made of soft cotton with delicate embroidery at the neck and sleeves. It smelled of lavender and sage, and Etta felt her eyes burn with unexpected tears. I can't. You can and you will. Maria's voice brooked no argument. I see the way that man looks at you, mija, like you hung the moon. A love like that deserves celebrating. The morning came soft and cool, with birds singing in the mission gardens. Etta stood before the spotted mirror in her room, hardly recognizing the woman looking back. The dress fit as if made for her, and Maria had helped pin her hair up with small white flowers from the garden. She looked innocent, like the girl she might have been if life had taken different turns. Gideon was waiting at the altar, and the sight of him stole her breath. Someone, probably Father Miguel, had found him a clean white shirt and black vest. His arm was still bandaged, but he stood straight and tall, his eyes never leaving hers as she walked down the short aisle. The ceremony was conducted in a mix of English and Spanish, with Maria and the mission's groundskeeper, Jose, serving as witnesses, when Father Miguel asked if anyone knew reason why they should not be joined. Etta half expected the doors to burst open, marshals flooding in with warrants and accusations. But the moment passed in peaceful silence. Do you, Gideon, take this woman to be your wedded wife? Father Miguel asked. I do, His voice was strong, certain. "Do you, Etta, take this man to be your wedded husband?" For a heartbeat, she hesitated not from doubt, but from the sheer weight of the moment. Then she looked into Gideon's eyes, saw her future reflected there, and said, "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me by God and the territory of New Mexico, I pronounce you husband and wife." Gideon's kiss was tender, reverent, a promise sealed before heaven and witnesses. When they parted, Etta saw tears on his cheeks to match her own. They spent 3 days at the mission, a honeymoon of sorts. Days of walking in the gardens, sharing meals with the small community, helping with simple chores, nights of passion tempered with tenderness, learning each other in ways that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with love. On the third evening, as they sat watching the sunset from the bell tower, Gideon finally broached the subject they'd been avoiding. "We could stay," he said quietly. "Father Miguel would let us. We could take new names, build a life here, let the rest of the world forget we ever existed." Etta leaned against his shoulder, considering. It was tempting, this peaceful place where their past didn't matter. But you'd never forgive yourself for letting Coulter go, and I'd spend every day wondering when Thomas would send someone to find me. She turned to look at him. We'd be hiding still, just in a prettier cage. "So we go back to the plan. Clear your name, bring Coulter to justice." It sounds impossible when you say it out loud. Most worthwhile things do. He kissed her temple. But we've already done the impossible. Haven't we found each other in all this vast wilderness? Everything else is just details. They left the mission the next morning, Father Miguel blessing them for their journey. But their departure had not gone unnoticed. 3 hours out, Etta spotted the dust cloud following them. "Company," she said. Gideon had seen it too. "How many?" "3, maybe 4 riders, moving fast." They pushed their horses harder, but their pursuers matched their pace. By noon, it was clear they couldn't outrun them. They took position in a cluster of rocks, weapons ready. The riders came into view, rough men with the look of those who hunted humans for sport and profit, bounty hunters, just as Etta had feared. "Etta Calder," the lead rider called out, reining up just outside rifle range. "Also known as the Desert Wanderer. We know you're in there. Come out peaceful-like, and nobody needs to die today." "Except me. You mean?" Etta called back. "Well, the poster does say dead or alive, but alive pays better, so we're inclined to be civilized about this." Gideon shifted position, getting a better angle. "I count 4, he murmured. "The one talking and 3 spread out to flank us." "Federal Marshal Gideon Rourke," the leader called again. "Oh yes, we know about you too. Quite the scandal back in Fort Smith, decorated lawman throwing in with a wanted woman. There's paper on you now too, though not as generous as your wife's." Wife? The word hit Etta like a physical blow. Somehow these men knew about the marriage. Had someone at the mission talked, or had they simply been watching longer than she'd thought? "Here's what's going to happen," the bounty hunter continued. "You're going to throw out your weapons and come quiet. We'll take you back to face justice, all proper and legal. Otherwise, we'll burn you out of those rocks and take what's left. Your choice." "I've got a third option." Gideon called. "You ride away now. Forget you ever saw us. And live to spend your bounty money another day." The man laughed. 4 against 2, I like our odds." "Your funeral." What happened next took less than 30 seconds. Gideon's rifle cracked, and one of the flanking riders toppled from his saddle. Etta fired at almost the same instant, her shot taking another flanker in the shoulder, spinning him around. The leader and his remaining man dove for cover, returning fire that chipped rock inches from Etta's head. She rolled to a new position, came up shooting. Gideon was moving too, keeping the bounty hunters guessing. The wounded flanker tried to crawl to better cover. Etta's next shot ended his movement permanently. 3 down, but the leader was smart, patient. He kept them pinned while his partner worked around to their left. Etta, Gideon said, his voice deadly calm. When I give the word, you run for the horses. Like hell. That's an order. Wife. Before she could argue further, he was up and moving, charging straight at the leader's position. It was insane, suicidal, and it worked. The bounty hunter, shocked by the frontal assault, hesitated a split second too long. Gideon's shot took him center mass. But the flanking partner had a clear shot now. Etta saw him rise, saw his rifle swing toward Gideon's exposed back. Time slowed. She couldn't get a clean shot, couldn't warn him in time. The rifle cracked. Gideon spun and fell. No! The scream tore from Etta's throat as she fired, her bullets driving the last bounty hunter to cover. She ran to Gideon, skidding to her knees beside him. Blood was already pooling beneath him, the shot having taken him high in the back, possibly through the lung. His breathing was labored, bubbling. Gideon, no! Stay with me! Get to cover! He gasped. Still, one left. She dragged him behind a boulder, her hands shaking as she tried to stem the bleeding. But she'd seen enough wounds to know the truth. This was bad, maybe fatal. The last bounty hunter was calling out, trying to negotiate. But Etta wasn't listening. Her world had narrowed to the man in her arms, his blood on her hands, his green eyes growing dim. I'd face 100 bullets, he whispered, trying to smile. Don't you dare, she said fiercely. You promised me a future. You promised to help clear my name. You don't get to die on me now. Love you, Etta. Worth it. All worth it. His eyes fluttered closed. His breathing grew shallower. Something cold and deadly settled in Etta's chest. She laid Gideon carefully on the ground, checked her weapons, and stepped out from cover. The last bounty hunter saw her coming, saw something in her face that made him try to run. He didn't make it 10 feet. Etta stood over his body, feeling nothing. Then she ran back to Gideon, pressing her hands against his wound, willing him to breathe, to live, to keep his promise. Please, she whispered to the desert sky, to the godfather Miguel served, to anyone who might be listening. Please don't take him, not now, not when we've just begun. As if in answer, Gideon's eyes flickered open, still breathing, still fighting, still alive. For now, the cabin materialized out of the mountain mist like something from a dream, or perhaps a prayer answered. Etta had been riding for 2 days straight. Gideon slumped against her, his blood seeping through bandage after bandage. She'd talked to him constantly, afraid that if she stopped, he would too. Stay with me, she whispered for the 100th time. Just a little further. The structure was small but solid, built into a natural cave formation with thick log walls and a stone chimney. More importantly, smoke rose from that chimney, suggesting someone was home. Etta didn't care if it was outlaws, hermits, or the devil himself. Gideon needed help. She fired a shot into the air, then called out, "Hello, the cabin, I have a wounded man. We need help." The door opened cautiously, and an elderly man emerged, rifle in hand. He took in the scene, a dust-covered woman supporting a blood-soaked man on a tired horse, and lowered his weapon. "Bring him in," he said simply. The man introduced himself as Doc Holliday, no relation to the gunfighter, he said with dry humor. He'd been an army surgeon before seeking solitude in these mountains, and his hands were steady and skilled as he examined Gideon's wound. "Bullet's still in there," he said, "lodged near the spine. I can try to remove it, but it's risky. Could paralyze him, could kill him. Doing nothing will definitely kill him. Just slower." Etta looked at Gideon's pale face, felt his fever-hot skin. "Do it!" The surgery took 3 hours. Etta assisted, following Doc's terse instructions, trying not to think about how much blood there was, how still Gideon lay. When Doc finally dropped the bullet into a metal pan with a small clink, she nearly collapsed with relief. "He's not out of danger," Doc warned, washing his hands. "Infection, fever, A dozen other things could still claim him, but he's got a chance now. For 5 days, Etta never left Gideon's side. She bathed his burning skin with cool water, forced broth between his lips when he could swallow, talked to him through the delirium. Doc Holliday proved to be more than just a skilled surgeon. He was kind, asking no questions about who they were or why men had been shooting at them. On the 6th morning, Etta woke from an exhausted doze to find green eyes watching her with clarity for the first time. "Etta," Gideon's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here." She gripped his hand, tears streaming down her face. "You scared me." "Sorry," he tried to smile. "Did we win?" "We're alive. That's winning enough for now." He drifted back to sleep, but it was healing sleep now, not the restless fever dreams of the past days. Etta finally allowed herself to step outside, breathing mountain air that tasted of pine and possibility. Doc was on the porch, smoking a pipe. "He'll make it," he said. "Tough as old leather, that one. You both are." "Thank you. I don't know how we can ever repay." "No payment needed." He studied her with shrewd eyes. "Though, if you're inclined to share your story, I admit to curiosity. Not many women can field dress a gunshot wound like you did." Etta considered, then found herself telling him everything. About her father, about Thomas Brennan's betrayal, about meeting Gideon and their unlikely partnership. Doc listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding. "Seems to me," he said when she finished, "that you've been playing defense too long, running, reacting, letting others set the terms. Maybe it's time to go on the offensive." "How I'm wanted. Gideon's wanted now, too. We have no allies, no resources." "You have something better. You have the truth." Doc knocked his pipe against the porch rail. "And you have each other. That Marshall friend of yours, he must have contacts. People who trust his word despite the wanted posters." Etta thought about it. Gideon had mentioned his deputy, Chen Wei, Judge Parker in Fort Smith, known for his fairness. "Maybe there's something else," Doc said. "I may be a hermit, but I'm not completely cut off. Riders come through sometimes, bringing news. Word is Sam Coulter's gang is fracturing. That raid you pulled got him wounded, made him look weak. Some of his men are splitting off, going independent. Good for them. One of them might be good for you. Jake Morrison used to be Coulter's second. He's been asking around about making a deal with the law, trading information for amnesty. Man like that might know things about Thomas Brennan's dealings. Coulter supplied guns to anyone with money. After all." A spark of hope ignited in Etta's chest. If they could connect Brennan to illegal gun running. Gideon's recovery was slow but steady. Within 2 weeks, he was able to sit up, then stand, then take careful steps around the cabin. The bullet had missed anything vital by mere fractions, what Doc called the luckiest unlucky shot he'd ever seen. "We can't stay here forever," Gideon said one evening as they sat before the fire. His color was better, though he still moved carefully. "Doc's been more than generous, but—" "I know." Etta had been thinking the same thing. "He told me about Jake Morrison, about the possibility of connecting Brennan to Coulter's gun running." "It's a long shot." "Better than no shot at all." Gideon was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about what you said, about going on the offensive. There's a telegraph station in Magdalena, about 40 miles from here. I could wire Chen Wei, feel him out. He's a good man. He'd tell me straight if it's safe to come in, or if we need to keep running." "And if it's not safe?" "Then we go with your plan. Find Morrison. Build a case against Brennan from the ground up." He took her hand. "Either way, we do it together." 3 weeks after arriving more dead than alive, they prepared to leave Doc's mountain sanctuary. The old surgeon packed them supplies, including precious medical items. "You'll need these more than I will," he said gruffly. "And this," he handed Gideon a sealed letter. "My testimony about treating your wounds, in case you need proof of what happened. My word still carries some weight in certain circles." "Doc, we can't thank you enough." "Then don't try." Just live good lives. That's payment enough. They rode out at dawn, Gideon still moving stiffly but determined. The journey to Magdalena took 2 days, with frequent stops to rest. Etta watched him constantly, alert for signs of pain he might be hiding, but he seemed to grow stronger with each mile. The telegraph office was small and dusty, the operator looking bored until Gideon slid money across the counter. Need to send a wire to Fort Smith, Arkansas, Deputy U.S. Marshal Chen Wei. The operator's eyes widened slightly. He clearly recognized the name but took the message without comment. Chen Wei, stop. This is GR, stop. Need to know if safe to come home. Stop. Have information about SC operation? Stop. Please advise. Stop. Will wait. Response. Stop. They took a room at the boarding house, using assumed names, and waited. The response came the next day. Chen Wei's cautious nature evident even in telegraph speak. GR, stop situation. Complicated, stop. Judge Parker interested in your information. Stop suggests meeting in neutral location. Stop Amarillo. Stop will arrange safe passage. Stop trust no one else. Stop CW. Stop Amarillo, Etta said. That's Texas. Neutral ground. Outside both our jurisdictions. Gideon folded the telegram carefully. Parker's a fair man. If Chen Wei says he's interested, there's hope. It could be a trap. Could be. But what's our alternative? Keep running until someone faster catches up. She knew he was right. They'd been reactive too long, letting others dictate their lives. It was time to take control, even if it meant riding into danger. They spent another day in Magdalena, gathering supplies and information. The town was buzzing with news Sam Coulter had been killed by his own men in a dispute over money, his gang scattering to the winds. Jake Morrison was indeed looking to make a deal, currently holed up in Socorro with a lawyer. It's coming together, Gideon said that night. Coulter dead, Morrison talking, Judge Parker willing to listen. We might actually pull this off. Or die trying. Either way, we'll be together. He pulled her close, kissing her with a passion that had only grown stronger through their trials. No regrets, Mrs. Rourke. None, she agreed, meaning it. They left for Amarillo the next morning, riding toward either justice or doom, but for the first time since that day in the desert when she'd saved a wounded marshal. Etta called her Rourke. Felt like she was riding toward something instead of away from it. The cabin in the Dragoon Mountains faded behind them, along with Doc Holliday and his quiet sanctuary. Ahead lay Amarillo and answers, truth and consequences. Whatever came next, they would face it as they'd faced everything else together, partners to the end. The land changed as they rode north into Colorado. Red desert giving way to rolling grasslands that stretched to the horizon. After weeks of running and fighting, the peaceful vastness felt like a balm to Etta's soul. They'd received word in Amarillo Judge Parker had reviewed their case. Jake Morrison's testimony had proven damning to Thomas Brennan, and warrants had been issued. Not for them, but for Brennan himself, on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and murder. It's over, Gideon had said, holding the telegram with hands that shook slightly. You're free. Free. The word still felt foreign on Etta's tongue. For so long. She'd defined herself by what she was running from. Now, riding beside her husband toward the small valley they'd purchased with Mary Sullivan's grandmother's rings, she was learning to define herself by what she was running toward. There. Gideon pointed ahead to where a creek curved through a stand of cottonwoods. That's our northern boundary. Another word that made her heart skip. They'd found the land through Chen Wei's cousin, who'd heard of a homestead whose elderly owner wanted to sell to good people. 40 acres, with water rights and a cabin that needed work but had solid bones. The cabin was smaller than she'd imagined, but charming in its simplicity. Someone had planted roses by the door years ago, and they'd gone wild, climbing the walls in a tangle of red blooms. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight, and Etta could see the possibilities: curtains at the windows, rag rugs on the floors, a life built day by day. "It's perfect," she said. "It needs work," Gideon warned, testing a floorboard that creaked ominously. "Roof needs patching, chimney needs cleaning, and I'm pretty sure something's nesting in the walls." "It's still perfect," he smiled, pulling her close. "Have I mentioned that I love you?" "Once or twice, but I don't mind hearing it again." They spent their first night in their new home wrapped in bedrolls on the floor, listening to the wind in the cottonwoods and making plans. Gideon would pick up blacksmith work in the nearby town of Cedar Ridge. His shoulder had healed well, though it still ached before storms. Etta would offer her services as a midwife and healer, skills that were always needed on the frontier. "We'll need a new name for you," Gideon said, "something that fits our new life." "I was thinking, Etta Rourke has a nice sound to it." That it does. Within a month, they'd made the cabin livable. Gideon proved handy with hammer and saw, while Etta coaxed the neglected garden back to life. The townspeople of Cedar Ridge were cautiously friendly, accepting their story of being newlyweds from Kansas looking for a fresh start. It was while fixing the chicken coop that Gideon found her a small girl, maybe 6 years old, huddled in the corner like a frightened animal. She was barefoot, her dress torn, her face streaked with tears and dirt. "Hello there," he said gently, crouching down to seem less threatening. "I'm Gideon. What's your name?" The girl just stared with huge brown eyes. Etta appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene instantly. She moved slowly, settling beside Gideon. "Are you hungry, sweetheart? I've got biscuits and honey inside." That got a reaction, the smallest nod. They coaxed her into the house, where she fell on the food like she hadn't eaten in days. Between bites, her story came out in fragments. Her name was Grace. Her parents had died of fever. She'd been living with an uncle who drank and used his fists freely. She'd run away 3 days ago. "Where's your uncle now?" Gideon asked carefully. "Don't know, don't care. Not going back." The fierce determination in such a small voice broke Etta's heart. They put her to bed in the small loft, where she fell asleep instantly, clutching the corn-husk doll Etta had quickly fashioned. Downstairs, husband and wife looked at each other. "We can't send her back if the uncle's cruel," Etta said. "No, we can't. The authorities will put her in an orphanage or apprentice her to whoever pays." Gideon ran his hand through his hair. "She needs a home, a real home. We're not exactly established here ourselves. What if someone comes looking? What if—" He caught her hands. "What if we're exactly what she needs? 2 people who understand what it's like to run from cruelty, to need shelter." Etta thought about the empty bedrooms upstairs, the quiet meals for 2, the love they had that seemed too large for just the 2 of them. "You want to keep her?" "Don't you?" She did. From the moment she'd seen Grace's frightened eyes, something maternal had stirred in her chest. "It won't be easy. She's been through trauma, and there might be legal complications." "Since when have we shied away from complications?" That made her smile. True enough. Grace stayed. Within a week, she was following Etta around the garden, learning plant names. Within 2 weeks, she was helping Gideon in his forge, pumping the bellows with determination that belied her small size. Within a month, she was calling them Mama Etta and Papa Gid, and neither of them corrected her. The uncle never came looking. They learned later he'd drunk himself to death, leaving Grace officially orphaned. The local judge, impressed by the stable home the Rourkes provided, granted them guardianship with minimal fuss. "Our first," Etta said one evening, watching Grace chase fireflies in the yard. "First. You don't think she'll be the only lost soul to find their way to our door, do you?" She was right. That winter, they took in 10-year-old James, whose parents had abandoned him at a stage stop. The following spring brought 8-year-old Sarah, and yes, the irony of the name wasn't lost on Gideon, who'd been traveling with grandparents who died on the trail. Their cabin grew. Gideon added rooms with help from neighbors who'd become friends. Etta's reputation as a healer spread, bringing in enough income to feed their growing family. The children thrived, helping with chores, attending the small school in town, slowly learning to trust again. "You know what people are calling us," Etta said one day, returning from town with supplies. "What's that?" "The sanctuary. They say any child who needs help knows to find the Rourke place." "And that bothers you?" "No," she smiled, watching their 3 help unload the wagon, bickering good-naturedly about who would carry what. It sounds about right. One evening, as autumn painted the mountains gold, a lone rider approached their home. Etta tensed, old instincts never quite fading, but relaxed when she recognized him, Chen Wei, Gideon's former deputy. "Chen," Gideon embraced his old friend. "What brings you to Colorado?" "Wanted to see for myself that you'd really settled down." Chen looked around appreciatively. "Judge Parker sends his regards. Says to tell you Brennan was convicted on all counts. He'll spend the rest of his days in federal prison." Justice, finally and completely. Etta felt the last weight lift from her shoulders. Chen stayed for dinner, charming the children with stories and sleight-of-hand tricks. As he prepared to leave, he pulled Gideon aside. "There's a marshal position opening in Denver. Judge Parker wanted me to ask if you're interested." Gideon looked at his home, Etta laughing at something Grace had said, James showing Sarah how to whittle, lamplight making everything golden and warm. "Tell Judge Parker I appreciate the thought," he said. "But I've already got a job. Best one I've ever had." Chen smiled. "Thought you might say that. Take care, old friend." "You too." That night, as they tucked the children into bed and settled by their fire, Etta curled into Gideon's side. "Any regrets?" she asked. "You could have been a marshal again. Had your old life back." "This is my life," he said simply. "You, the children, this place. I meant what I said all those months ago. I'd face 100 bullets to wake up with you. Turns out, building a life together takes just as much courage as any gunfight. And it's worth it." He kissed her, slow and sweet, every single day. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, blanketing their small corner of the world in pristine white. Inside, their home was warm with love and laughter and the promise of tomorrow. The desert wanderer and the marshal were gone, their story fading into frontier legend. In their place stood Etta and Gideon Rourke, mother and father, healers and protectors. Proof that sometimes the best revenge against a cruel world is building something beautiful in spite of it. And in the years to come, as their family grew and their reputation spread, they would offer the same gift to every lost soul who found their way to their door, a chance to stop running and start living, to trade fear for hope, to discover that home isn't just a place, but the people who choose to love you despite your scars. It was, as Gideon often said, the best job either of them had ever had. 5 years had painted silver in Gideon's dark hair and etched laugh lines around Etta's eyes. Their small homestead had grown into a proper ranch, with a barn, expanded house, and fields that yielded enough to feed their ever-growing family. The morning sun cast long shadows as Etta stood on the porch, watching their children, 6 of them now, help Gideon with the morning chores. Grace, nearly 12 and tall for her age, was showing the newest edition, 4-year-old Matthew, how to scatter grain for the chickens without scaring them. James had grown into a responsible young man of 15, his strength invaluable around the ranch. Sarah, Samuel, and little Rebecca completed their brood, each child arriving at their door through tragedy, but finding love and stability within their walls. Mrs. Rourke. A tentative voice drew Etta's attention. A young woman stood at the gate, travel-worn and hesitant, a bundle in her arms. "Yes. I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am, but I heard..." That is, people in town said—" She swayed on her feet, and Etta rushed forward to steady her. "Come inside," Etta said gently. "You look ready to drop." The woman's story came out over tea and biscuits. Widowed, penniless, with a baby she couldn't feed. She'd heard about the Rourke Ranch, about how they helped folks in need. "I'm not looking for charity," she said quickly. "I can work. I can cook, clean, help with the children. I need somewhere safe for a while." Etta exchanged glances with Gideon, who'd come in from the fields. They'd had this conversation before their home had become a way station for the desperate, a place of second chances. "We could use help with the harvest," Gideon said. "Room and board, plus wages when we can manage it." The relief on the woman's face was profound. Thank you both." Her name was Margaret, and she became the first of what would be many who found not just shelter but purpose at the Rourke Ranch. By the following autumn, they'd built a separate bunkhouse for the workers who stayed on men and women who'd arrived broken but gradually healed through honest work and being part of something larger than survival. The anniversary came on a crisp September morning, 10 years since that day in the Arizona desert when Etta had saved a wounded marshal. She found Gideon in the barn, mending harness, and wrapped her arms around him from behind. "Know what day it is?" she asked. "How could I forget day my life really began?" She smiled against his back. "We've come a long way from that cave." "That we have." He turned in her arms, studying her face with the same intensity he'd had all those years ago. "Any regrets?" "Not a one. You. Only that it took me so long to find you." Their kiss was interrupted by childish giggles. Rebecca and Matthew peered around the barn door, faces bright with mischief. "Mama and Papa are being mushy again," Rebecca announced. "Good," Gideon said, scooping her up and tickling her until she shrieked with laughter. "Means we love each other." "Will you tell us the story again?" Matthew asked. "About how you met?" It had become family legend, told and retold with small variations. How Mama had been a traveling doctor who saved Papa from bad men. How Papa had been a lawman bringing justice to the frontier. The darker truths, the running, the fear, the violence had been softened into adventure, though Etta suspected that when the children were older, they'd want the real story. For now, this version was enough. That evening, the entire extended family gathered for dinner their 6 children, Margaret and her little one, the 3 ranch hands who'd become like family, and, surprisingly, Chen Wei, who'd arrived that afternoon with news. "There's a movement in Congress," he said over coffee, "to provide pardons for certain cases where justice was clearly miscarried. Judge Parker's leading the effort. He wants to include your case, Etta." "But I don't need a pardon," Etta said, confused. "The real killer confessed. Brennan's in prison." "This would make it official, clear your name completely, in every jurisdiction. No more looking over your shoulder, wondering if some eager lawman might dig up old papers." Etta felt Gideon's hand find hers under the table. Complete exoneration, the final closing of that chapter of her life. "What do I need to do?" "Just write your account of events. Judge Parker will handle the rest." That night, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Etta sat at her desk with paper and ink. How to distill those years of pain and running into words. How to explain who she'd been and who she'd become. She wrote through the night, Gideon bringing her tea and sitting with her when the memories became too heavy. By dawn, she had 12 pages that told her truth, not just the facts of Thomas Brennan's betrayal, but the journey from that betrayal to this life, this home, this family. "It's perfect," Gideon said, reading over her shoulder. "Parker's a good man. He'll see justice done." The pardon came through the following spring, delivered by special courier along with a personal note from Judge Parker. Etta Calder Rourke was officially cleared of all charges, her record expunged, her innocence formally recognized. But the paper, while meaningful, felt almost anticlimactic. Her real vindication wasn't in government documents. It was in the laughter of children who called her mama, in the gratitude of people they'd helped, in the love of a man who'd chosen her above his badge and never looked back. Summer brought its own surprise. Grace, now a young woman of 17, had been corresponding with a young man from town, the schoolteacher's son, earnest and kind, when he came calling, hat in hand, to ask permission to court her properly. Etta felt time telescope. Was this how her father had felt, watching her grow up? He seems decent, Gideon said that night, but she could hear the protectiveness in his voice. She's growing up. Too fast. They all are. Etta leaned against him on the porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. James is talking about studying law. Sarah wants to be a doctor. Following in their parents' footsteps, in a way. In the best ways, I hope. The seasons turned, as they do, bringing changes both subtle and profound. The ranch prospered, becoming known throughout Colorado as a place of refuge and redemption. They added a schoolroom when the county couldn't provide a teacher for the scattered homesteads. Etta's medical practice grew to include a proper clinic in town, staffed by herself and Sarah, who proved to have natural healing gifts. One autumn evening, as their 20th anniversary approached, Gideon found Etta sitting by their bedroom window, holding a letter. "What's that?" "From Mary Sullivan. Remember her? The girl from Coulter's gang, of course. She's a grandmother now. Can you imagine? Says she still has the music box I gave her made from one of those rings she gifted us." Etta smiled softly. "She thanks us in every letter for giving her a chance at life." "We've been blessed to give a lot of chances," Gideon said, sitting beside her. "And to get them." She took his hand, traced the calluses from years of honest work. "Do you remember what you said that night in the storm, that you'd face 100 bullets to wake up with me?" "I remember everything about that night." "Did you know then what we were starting?" "I knew I loved you. That was enough." "And now?" He looked out the window at their domain children's toys scattered in the yard, laundry dancing on the line, the bunkhouse where their extended family lived, the fields rich with harvest. "Now I know that bullets were the easy part. Building this, maintaining it, choosing each other every day through crying babies and hard winters and all the ordinary struggles, that's the real courage. Worth it." "I'd still face 100 bullets," he said, turning to kiss her temple, "just to wake up next to you," as if summoned by talk of bullets and courage. Young Matthew burst through the door. "Mama, Papa, come quick, there's a rider coming, and he looks hurt." They exchanged glances. Some things never changed. Together they rose, ready to face whatever new soul needed sanctuary, whatever new story was beginning. Because that's what the Rourke Ranch had become, not just a home, but a beginning place, where broken people could discover they weren't beyond mending, where second chances grew as readily as the corn in their fields. As they walked hand in hand toward another rescue, another chance to pay forward the grace they'd been given, Etta thought about the woman she'd been alone, running, trusting no one. That woman could never have imagined this life, this love, this legacy of healing that rippled out from a chance meeting in the desert. But then again, the best stories rarely end the way they begin. Sometimes a bullet meant to kill creates a love meant to heal. Sometimes running away leads you home. Sometimes the very thing you fear being known, being seen, being caught becomes your salvation. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find someone willing to face 100 bullets just to wake up beside you, and you spend the rest of your life proving that their courage wasn't misplaced. The desert wanderer was gone, her legend fading into frontier memory. In her place stood Etta Rourke, wife, mother, healer, haven maker, living proof that redemption isn't just possible but powerful enough to transform everything it touches. And in the end, that was the greatest justice of all. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Etta and Gideon's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. Where are you listening from today? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to connect with fellow Western romance enthusiasts from around the world. and hear your thoughts on this tale of redemption and love against all odds. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like, and don't forget to hit the hype button to help more people discover these tales of the American frontier. Until our next adventure in the Old West, happy trails, partners.